Hi, this is Rob Jolliffe with Sabre Limited, and today I want to get into a discussion of how long an ERP project should be. So let's jump into it. So I want to look at how long an ERP project should be and kind of answer your questions about that because I get asked this all the time and people are very confused by it. So let's just walk through. My name is Rob Jolliffe. I'm president of Sabre Limited, where I'm a Microsoft Dynamics Business Central expert, and we are specialists in manufacturing. So a little bit of this video is going to be focused on the manufacturing sector, but a lot of the ideas can be taken away for any type of business. A couple of assumptions I'm going to make when I'm talking. This is going to be a small project in Business Central terms. Less than 100 full users would be involved in this project. And actually 100 users would be pretty big. So probably 50-ish might be a typical number that you'd find. And it's going to be a manufacturing business that I'm going to be talking about. If you're in other types of industries, it can be much less time or much more time to implement Business Central. But for manufacturing, which is my expertise, let's just look at that. So two teams in any ERP project. If you're doing an ERP project, you're going to have these two teams. Theirs and yours. So theirs would be me and my team. Yours would be you and your staff. So I'm going to talk mostly about your team because your team are actually the bottleneck in the implementation. And you might question that and think, no, Rob, that can't be right. But I'll go through why, and I'll give you the basic outline of how the project, how your team impacts the project. So your team, first of all, they have regular jobs to do. We are dedicated and specialized in doing ERP implementations. You guys are not. And you probably haven't done this in a long time if it's been ever that your team has implemented an ERP. So it's absolutely required that your team be involved because you have to own the project. It's extremely important because this new system is going to run your company. So if your team aren't the owners of the project, you're really going to struggle. And so owning the project internally means you can't outsource it 100%. There's no way that you can take that entire project and have it delivered by somebody who isn't even part of your organization. It has to be members of your team who are implementing this project. Remember, you're going to be using the ERP system after it's up and running. If you don't understand how it was set up, if your staff had nothing to do with getting it up and running, it's just going to be a nightmare to use it. So, the reason that we need your team as the ERP consulting firm, the reason that your team is so important in this is they're the subject matter experts. They understand your business. Now, Sabre is very familiar with manufacturing. So we understand general manufacturing principles and terms and the best practices to implement a manufacturing business. And we're going to recommend those best practices and coach your team through using them, especially if you're really unfamiliar with ERP. But your team are the subject matter experts on your business and how you make things and what your supply chain looks like, what your scheduling process is, et cetera. So that's really, really important. So a mistake that owners who are buying an ERP make is they think of an ERP as being like a CAD system. It's a technical skill set that uses the ERP, and as long as with a CAD software with SolidWorks or AutoCAD, Inventor, Solid Edge, whatever it is that you guys are using for your CAD system, if I teach my engineers how to do it, it's a series of skills. They know how to design products, so as long as they understand the CAD system, they can design the product. ERP doesn't work that way because ERP is a business process software, and it requires business expertise to implement the system, not just the skills of doing tasks. So just to give you an example, one of the decisions that has to be made in implementing an ERP is whether or not your inventory will be managed in a standard cost or FIFO manner, FIFO being actual cost. That's a big decision and has a lot of ramifications to the business. And it can't just be made willy-nilly. You can't hand it to us and say, hey, you guys make the decision on how I'm going to do that. And we, on the other hand, can't have you guys say it's not important, just pick. So that element of the selection in implementing the ERP, if that takes a while and you guys run scenarios through to see what the impact of each is, that can delay the project quite a bit, just making that decision, because it's not even as simple as just an all-in decision. It could be that you decide the raw materials should be standard cost, but the finished goods should be FIFO cost, actual cost, or vice versa. And those decisions have a lot of ramifications and a lot of elements that have to be decided and have to be worked through by your team. So hiring an expert. I get this all the time. Why don't I just hire an expert? I'll hire somebody in-house. They'll be superstars at doing it because they've done 3 ERP implementations in the last couple of years, and they'll just run the whole project, and then my team can work. First of all, working with an ERP team on a project, even leading that project, does not make someone an expert. Your team are not going to be experts in implementing ERP by the time they're finished doing the project. They're going to be somewhat familiar with doing it, and they would have a lot less difficulty doing it a second time, but they can't do it entirely on their own. There's too many decisions to be made and too much to learn. We consider a staff member to be fully qualified to lead an ERP project when they've had 5,000 hours of solid ERP implementation experience, which is about 2.5 years. Up until that point, we coach them and we mentor them, and we have senior staff members who are working alongside them. So unless you have an ERP team leader who comes from some other business that has done 5,000 hours of ERP projects, they're not going to be senior. They're not going to have that level of skill and knowledge that they need. So you have to assume, even if you hire some external expert, that you still need that team that are going to be members of your staff who are going to be dedicated to this project a percentage of their time, because they have to do their regular jobs, like I said earlier, and they're going to have to do a lot of thinking, and they're going to have to do a lot of grunt work. The thinking is going to be making decisions about how the business should use this new ERP, example I gave earlier, and the grunt work are going to be the cleaning up of raw data that needs to be loaded into the ERP. The loading of data isn't that hard. We train customers to do it. It's really more tedious than difficult. The cleaning up of the data is something only you can do, and usually only senior people. So I'm going to do a session on choosing a team as a deep dive to get into that part, but let's just move on. Assuming that you're going to choose the team, I'll give you the highlights. First of all, you should keep your team small. There's a tendency, a desire to say, well, I'm paying my ERP consultant for the hours of ERP implementation, which note, Sabre does not charge by the hour. We do fixed fee. But even so, there's an idea that I'm going to slam all of my staff into every training session so that they all pick up something. Well, don't do that. It's a really bad idea. 2, you need your best people to be part of this ERP implementation, not junior people. If you put junior people in the ERP implementation, it will at least double the time and probably result in a really bad implementation. You need senior people because you have to be able to trust them to make the decisions that are going to be made, at least up until about the halfway point of the project. And we're going to talk about the total hours. So until you get to that halfway point and the decisions are made, you're not going to bring in the more junior people. So you're starting with a small team of your best people. And assume that between them all, you're going to spend about 40 hours-ish a week. Now, I put a star there because if you're willing to double the duration of the project, you can put half the time in. If you're willing to double the amount of time you invest, you could probably do the project in about half the time. But there's a point where having more people on the project is like trying to have more women on a pregnancy to reduce the time the pregnancy will take. There's a diminishing return, I would say, after you have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 80 hours a week of implementation time on a typical project for a small, medium business. Because to be honest, there are just some times you're going to need to sleep on it. And there are some times when putting 2 people on the same task is not going to speed it up because they're going to step on each other. So I would suggest that you have a team of 5 to 6 people. You have maybe 4 at 3 at the small. If you have less than 3 with 2 people or less, we found a lot of problems because the team is just too small to handle everything. So I would say at least 3 or 4 people, up to 5 or 6. 7 is really stretching it. About 40 hours a week between the entire group, and throwing lots more people at it isn't going to speed it up. The total time commitment is going to be between 600 and 1,200 hours. I would tend to favor the 1,200 hours. I think that's more realistic. So in order to get an implementation done, you're looking at about half a man year, half a person year of work, which is 1,000 hours usually is a person year, spread out over these 5 people. Now, as the project gets closer to the end, you might have more and more people join. I'm not counting them. I'm not considering those people's time. They'll be spending 3 to 5 hours, maybe 8 hours in some training classes each, but they won't be doing between them all 40 hours a week. It's this core group that we're talking about. So how many hours a week can your team spare? If you could answer that question and you have the 1,200 hours and use that as your baseline, then you can figure out how long your ERP project's going to take. So you take your 1,200 hours and you divide it by that number. So if your team can do 40 hours a week, then 1,200 hours divided by 40 hours a week is going to give you about 30 weeks. And that's probably the most correct number that we see. We've had clients do ERP projects and go live in as little as 12 weeks, but that's in a situation, for instance, where the business basically has a really, really slow time due to some seasonality, and they reach the point where they have 5 or 6 people who can work 80 hours a week between the 5 or 6 of them, and those projects can take 12 to 15 weeks. We have had clients who have had very simple implementations, and so it's not 1,200 hours, it's more like 800 or 600 hours, and those are done more quickly as well. But the typical project runs around 20 to 30 weeks. That's a safe bet for a project, and certainly if you're willing to put the energy and effort in, you can accelerate it, but that's probably a really safe timeline. Thanks for watching this video. We're Sabre Limited. You can contact us at www.sabrelimited.com. You can email sales@sabrelimited.com. I'm Robert@sabrelimited.com if you want to email me, or you can find me on LinkedIn at Rob Jolliffe. Thanks very much, and I hope you enjoyed this video.